Good afternoon and welcome to the first session in the City of London Flood Resilience webinar series. My name is Maddie Smith and I am one of the Emergency Planning and Resilience Officers at the City of London. I'll be hosting today's session. I'm also pleased to be working alongside my colleague, Ella Brown, one of the City's Environmental Resilience Officers who will be co-hosting the series with me. Over the next 8 weeks, we'll be exploring a range of themes around flood resilience to sharing practical, easy actions to help better protect yourself, your family, and your workplace. This series is part of our wider effort to improve how we share information and to strengthen collaboration and connection with our communities around risk and resilience. There will be an opportunity for question and answers at the end of the presentations, and we encourage you to use the Q&A box throughout the session. Please note that today's session is being recorded and we will be uploading the video to the City of London's website for those who aren't able to attend live today. If you prefer not to be recorded, please keep your cameras off. Microphones have been muted automatically, but if you are experiencing any technical issues, please use the chat function. So I'm delighted to be joined today by our two wonderful guest speakers who will be discussing barriers around flooding, including the history of flooding in London and the development of flood defences around the city. Our first speaker is Tom Ferber. Tom is an engagement and learning officer at the London Archives, where he delivers bi-monthly talks on a wide range of London history topics. His work forms part of the broad portfolio of activities and projects across the London Archives' formal education, information adult education, and community programs, all aimed at connecting people with over 950 years of London's history. Thanks, Tom. I'll hand it over to you.
I think you'll have to reshare your slides and take yourself.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I got all my windows all entangled. What a great way to start the presentation. Well, thank you, Ella and Maddie, for having me along, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. If you could give me just one moment, I'll sort out that little tangle with my slides, and we'll begin properly. I'm just going to one more time because I've done something silly that will catch us out later, so I better get it right the first time. There we go. Now you should all be able to see my screen, I hope. See a nice intro slide, and I'll just make sure I can see my notes, and all will be well. There we go. So hopefully that's all in order. I'm afraid I can't now see the meetings. If anything's awry, someone needs to sort of say something rather than wave, so I can see what's going on. That's okay with everyone. Great. So let me just introduce myself. So as you heard, my name's Tom and I'm an engagement learning officer at the London Archives. And I'd like to start this talk with a little caveat, which is that I'm not an expert in sort of geography, environment or anything water related. My background is very much in history, and the nature of that knowledge in my role at London Archives, it's my job to sort of know a little bit about a lot, so I can help people sort of make best use of our collections that we have at the London Archives. So big thank you again to Ella and Maddie for inviting me along today. I think there's something really valuable and grounding about seeing kind of contemporary issues in historical context, and that's something that the archive can provide very well. I hope some of you have heard of us, but I wouldn't expect you all to have done. Indeed, I wouldn't expect all of you to be familiar with what archives are. So just in general, you can think of as an archive as a cross between a museum and a library. We're like a museum in that we're a place that looks after rare, often unique, precious objects from the past. But we're like a library in that one of the primary roles of an archive is it's a place where you can come and do research, where you can kind of find out what it is that you want to know about in our case, about London, but other archives, of course, other subjects as well. And then the London Archives is one of the biggest archives in the country, the second largest public archive in the country. And you measure the size of an archive by sort of thinking, if you made a giant shelf out of all our shelves, how big that shelf would be. So we're very lucky to be sitting on 100 kilometres of collections that, as I say, go back nearly 950 years, which include over 3.5 million books, manuscripts, photos, prints and films, all different documents that give you a sense of London's history. And I should say as well, we're open to the public without an appointment, and if you want to come and see us in person, we are in Clerkenwell, just behind Exmouth Market, if you know that area. And I've been doing this a little while now, and so I have a bit of a sense on what archives people know about and what they don't. And I would say, for my money, the most famous archival document is the Magna Carta, and we are very lucky in that we have two Magna Cartas in the collections of the London Archives, which might sound a bit strange. The Magna Carta is actually fairly common as these things go, because it was issued multiple times to multiple people to help spread the king's word. And although this very famous document doesn't mention flooding directly, it does talk about water management. There's alongside the more sort of high-minded and politically consequential clauses around rights and jury trials and things like that. There's a clause 33 which talks about fish weirs on the Thames, the idea being that these were used for fishing and that they were causing an obstruction to navigation. So even documents that are often quite high-minded, and they go back a long way, do kind of have concerns about water management in them. But flooding itself is mentioned more directly in two other very famous and fairly old archival documents. So the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which I'm afraid we don't look after, of 1099, talks about the sea flood springing up to such a height and did so much harm as no man remembered that it ever did before. 600 years later, in what probably has a equally viable claim to the most famous archival document, Samuel Pepys, in his diary from the 7th of December 1663, talks about the greatest tide that ever was remembered in England to have been in this river, all Whitehall having been drowned. And on the screen now you can see an image of Whitehall, not quite contemporary with Samuel Pepys' diary. This is an image from 1616 called the Vischer Panorama, and this is a really wonderful, what we call long view of the Thames. So it covers the Thames from Westminster to the city. But what we can see here is a close-up detail of this panorama, and I invite your attention to the sort of the second half, the left-hand side of the image, where you can see Whitehall. You can see Whitehall stairs, and if you go and then you sort of follow that image around, you can see these stairs are access to the riverbank, but also there is a river wall in place there. So even 400 odd years ago, there are kind of practical concerns about defending sort of land alongside the Thames from flooding, and accounts of it going wrong. And what that quote about the greatest tide reminds us of is something that we can take for granted. The Thames is a tidal river, at least as far as Teddington, and indeed the Thames has a large tidal amplitude, which just means that there's a large difference between the water at high tide and at low level. Indeed, much of present-day London is recovered marshland, and although this recovery process has been going on for as long as it has existed, there are sort of accounts and speculation of the Romans undertaking such work, and accounts before that as well. It really accelerates from the mid 18th century. That's when we see various projects designing to both sort of tame the river, improve the environment around the river, and just to get more land to become available. And this map is from 1746, and it's I think quite a special map for a couple of reasons. One, it's the map maker himself, John Rock, the surveyor and cartographer, is widely regarded as one of the finest, if not the finest, 18th century map maker, and so it's just special to have his work so well preserved and on display here. Also, the sort of middle of the 18th century is a very important time in London history. That's really when London starts this process of growth that will take it from a large but unremarkably large city to, at its height, the most populous and biggest city in the world throughout the 19th century. And one of the very interesting things about studying London history is, in many ways, London got there first with some of the problems that are now more widespread when it comes to urban living. So we see all manner of different changes that come to London in the middle of the 18th century. But as I say, one that starts to accelerate is the gradual reclaiming of land from the Thames. So in fact, much of present day London is sort of reclaimed marshland. And the reason I brought this map out, other than I rather like it, is because it gives us a sense of what the footprint of London was like before this process, and specifically for our purposes this afternoon, it gives us a sense as well of the profile of the Thames along the river. It's much wider than it is today, and I think you can see that particularly in the sort of middle section around the map near where sort of Blackfriars Bridge would be, those sorts of places there. Interestingly as well, this is pre the kind of the bridge building, so a lot less obstruction on the river as well. One of the very big changes that comes to the River Thames in the 19th century is, of course, the building of the Victoria Embankment, which was built in the 1860s. The story of the building of the Victoria Embankment is most closely linked to the huge sort of sanitation and sewage problems that London faced in the 19th century. The increase in population, the kind of the rudimentary and sort of incremental but not full progress when it came to the dealing of human and other waste meant that more detritus, sort of human, industrial and otherwise, was ending up in the river than ever before, causing all manner of problems. And a new sewerage system was built by under the auspices of the Metropolitan Board of Works and Sir Joseph Bazalgette to deal with that sewage problem. So that's sort of the most famous story that we think of when it comes to the embankment. But as this image from the Illustrated London News shows, there is much more to the embankment than a sewerage system. So we can see the sewage system there. We can also see two types of railway, the more familiar sort of steam railway, but also a briefly ran pneumatic railway. And we can see, for our purposes, that a river wall, a sea wall is being built as well alongside. And this is now today part of over 200 miles of walls that line the river from the mouth of the river to Teddington, where the tidal portion of the Thames ends. Indeed, as a sort of an aside, one speculation of the etymology of Teddington is tide ending town. One way we can kind of compare and get a sense of the changes of the River Thames, and indeed other changes in London as well, is with a really great online resource called Layers of London, which is something that the London Archives and many other archives and libraries and institutions have contributed to. If you're interested in London history, if you're interested in the course of the river, I really can't recommend this source enough. What Layers of London allows you to do, as the name suggests, is that you can overlay various maps of London on top of each other. These are historical maps and sort of contemporary maps as well. The maps have been what's called geo-rectified, which geo-rectification is a process where you take an older map which has a lower standard of accuracy, and you basically take a modern satellite derived map, you find matching points on the map, and then you make the older map conform to the accuracy standards of the modern map. You lose something of the artistry when that happens, because it will kind of distort and pull the older map into different directions. But what you gain is you can make a direct comparison of then and now on a geographical basis. And if we do that with the Rock map, again from 1746, you really get a sense of how much of the river was reclaimed during the 19th and 20th centuries. Indeed, one Victorian engineer, James Walker, puts it very vividly. He says that if the walls were removed, the Thames would, at the very next tide, take possession of a large space that had been so long abstracted from it, and would be generally 5 times its present width. So you get there a sense of really how man-made the modern River Thames is. And these flood defences have provided, the defence and respite against the sort of the encroachment of the river for centuries, but they are by no means perfect. And despite the building of these flood defences, we do see kind of flooding incidents that are reflected in the archive sort of time and time again. On the screen now, you can see one such image from a flood from I believe the flood is 1877, although the publication of the book is 1878, but there might be some discrepancy there. And this is entitled Sufferers from the Floods, and we can see here a property that has been flooded. So we hear that property was flooded up to a depth of 4 feet. And this is part of a really quite a special volume called Street Life in London by the journalist Adolphe Smith and the photographer John Thompson. And so it's not in any way primarily focused on flooding, as the title suggests. It's a general survey of street life, and photography is a relatively new medium at this point, and so the journalists were using this to really capture their point. And it was in many ways a political text as well, talking about really how hard it was for many people to make a living and sort of survive as they go on. So I've chosen this both as an interesting and really very beautiful historical image. I love the tones of this particular style of photography, but also it gives us that reminder of the kind of the human consequences of flooding, and that these are kind of a perennial threat and a perennial challenge for people. And it provides, I think, quite a nice contrast to this nice image, which is several generations later from 1924. This is from another photojournalist, George W.F. Ellis, and we have a whole series of photographs from this photographer, pretty much all from the year 1923, 1924, capturing all different slices of London life. And I've included this one because it's very much the the 1920s version of something we're all very familiar to seeing on the news today. There's been a flood. They send the camera crew down and they get a photograph of a car or a bus driving through a flooded street. And if they're really lucky, they'll get someone going through on a kayak or a boat or something, and that person feels extra smug, and they'll generally sort of congratulate themselves on a good work of photojournalism, which is all well and good. But I think what that can do is that can make the consequence of flooding seem sort of quaint, which of course it isn't. And that was a reality that was brought home to Londoners very, very vividly only 4 years later. So 1928 is usually described as London's worst modern flood, killing 14 people and damaging many homes and businesses. And as a kind of a reminder back to that image from 1878, that some problems don't seem to not go away. The people that most suffered from those floods were the poorer people. So the people that were killed were people living in sort of basement accommodation. But the two images on the screen are from Poplar. And it took me a minute actually to realise what I was seeing in the image on the left hand side. So what you're seeing there is that the river wall has collapsed under the weight of the water. And once you sort of know that's what you're looking for, it does become a lot easier to see. You can see kind of the cracks and the collapsed wall kind of running down the middle of the image, and we can see the policeman just sort of guarding the scene on the left hand side. Then on the right, also from this same flood, we have the Orchard pub in Poplar nearby to that where the river wall burst, again bringing the human consequences of flooding home very, very vividly. But I'd also, and without to make light of that issue, this is an interesting image as well, and one I've used to illustrate totally different topics of London history, which is it's quite interesting to see, as an ale drinker myself, it's quite interesting to see what's going on under the bar when someone's pulling that pint of ale for you. So in sort of a parochial London sense, 1928 is seen as the worst modern flood. But if we were to take a kind of a wider national and international perspective, the most infamous flood comes in 1953. I won't talk much about this because Peter will tell you a bit more about that in his presentation. But just to say, there was huge loss of life in London. 307 people were no loss of life in London, but outside of London in this country, 307 people killed, and even higher numbers into the thousands were killed in the Netherlands. These images are from Putney on the left and Crossness on the right. So this storm, the storm that caused the flooding, occurred on the night of the 31st of January to the morning of the 1st of February. And the image on the left is dated 1st of February. Notice the swan swimming on the wrong side of the river, alongside of the barrier. And then on the right, this is at Crossness, and this is actually 10 days after the flood. We can see how long it's taking for the water to subside or not subside in this case. And as you might imagine, this prompted many concerns about flood defences and flood for the future, and these are addressed in a sort of a public information film from 1975, which I'll play now. Any issues with the sound or anything, please let me know. But I will just say it is an old film. There is a bit of an issue with the quality. It's sort of, I'm not quite sure what the word is, it sort of pulsates slightly, giving it a sort of like unintentional psychedelic effect, which I hope adds to the charm rather than is a distraction. So I'll play that for you now.
Tide levels have been increasing steadily, particularly since the late 18th century, when a recorded tide reached almost 14 feet above the Newlyn sea level line. During the next 100 years, a clear pattern was emerging. Each isolated, exceptional high tide was higher than the last. By 1928, a high tide had reached 17 feet above the Newlyn line, and London's defences were overtopped. Those defences were improved and strengthened in 1930. But in 1953, a high tide again overtopped them and breached defences in many places in the lower estuary. By 1972, new defences had again restored the safety margin. But even these defences are not a permanent solution. And as the trend of higher tides continues, the question must be asked, when will London be faced with a total flood disaster? Tide level.
And the sort of the long-term defence that was reported as a solution to that total flood disaster would become the Thames Barrier. As the barrier was being built, though, there were interim measures that need to be put in place, and you get a sense of them from this poster produced in 1979, which both describes the warning system should there be a London flooding event, and also gives a sort of vivid illustration of how catastrophic that could be, with the light blue area spilling out from the dark blue course of the Thames there. In 1983, the Thames Barrier opens. I'll save the details about its construction, how it works, all of those things, what might supersede it for Pete in the next presentation. But before that, I just want to say two last things. The first is that although today I've focused on visual sources, maps, videos, photographs, those sorts of things, I do want to just stress that we do have a huge amount of more kind of technical archival sources that are relevant to this topic as well. You can see, just as an example there, a more technical report from the 1928 flood. We have the records of various municipal bodies going back to the 19th century and beyond, actually. So if that's the kind of research that you're interested in, we are a very good source for that as well. And the second point, the way that you could follow up on that research is you can go to our website, the London Archives. That's information about our events, our catalogue, getting started, all of those things. But if you've enjoyed the pictures that we've seen today, many of them are available on that website there, the London Picture Archive, and that's available from home, 250,000 images of London. If you're interested in infrastructure, London history, any of those things, you can while away many a pleasant hour on that website. So thank you again for having me along. That's me done. I'll stop my share and hand over back to you guys, Ellie and Maddie.
Thanks, Tom. That was really interesting. I love seeing the flood stories and the video of the tidal changes, even back from the 1800s. I didn't know they changed that much, so thank you for that. For anyone who has questions and answers, please put them into the chat box and we will come to them after Pete's presentation. So next, I'm really pleased to introduce to you Pete Thomas from the Environment Agency. Pete is a senior advisor in flood risk management with over 20 years experience covering Hertfordshire, North London and the Thames Estuary. His work focuses on capital program and project delivery, the Thames Estuary 2100 plan, technical leadership and instant response. Thanks, Pete. I'll pass it to you.
Thanks, Maddie. Thanks, Ella. And yeah, thanks, Tom, for your really, really interesting presentation there. So a tough act to follow, but here goes. So yeah, thanks, everyone, and good afternoon. I'm Pete from the Environment Agency. For those who don't know, the Environment Agency is the environmental regulator in England, responsible for regulating major industry and waste, contaminated land, water quality, water resources, fisheries, ecology. We operate some navigations on various rivers, and we're also responsible for the small matter of managing the risk of flooding in England from rivers, reservoirs and the sea. And I'll be talking about some of the existing tidal defences on the River Thames, and also the plan for the future, which is Thames Estuary 2100. So just a couple of slides to start with, looking at most recent flooding in London, adding to some of Tom's information. So 1928 saw the last major flooding in London. Sadly, 15 people drowned and thousands were made homeless. You can see the kind of red affected areas on that map, and a couple of old images from then, almost 100 years ago. Particularly affected were basements in the Westminster area, trapping many people while they slept. And then Tom also touched on 1953. So it was a huge East Coast tidal surge, came down the North Sea. London was largely spared, but that was only because of very significant flooding towards the mouth of the Thames estuary. So water levels were almost 0.5 metre higher at Southend than in 1928, although only 16 centimetres higher at Silvertown in London. Over 300 people died in England, many of those in Essex. One person died in London, and that was due to gas exposure rather than directly from the flooding. Over 25,000 properties were damaged, 30,000 people evacuated, and over 100,000 acres of land was flooded along the coast. And as Tom alluded to, the impacts were even greater in the Netherlands, where over 1,800 people died. So although there's now the Thames Barrier and the raised defences, which I'll come on to in a couple of slides' time, this map shows the areas that are potentially at risk from a failure of those defences or overtopping. And the kind of previous natural floodplain is those sort of blue areas, and that could be both flooding from fluvial sources, so river, or tidal floodplain. And as you can see, it's quite extensive through West London, through many parts of central London, the Docklands, and out into the estuary. So a bit of information about some of the existing flood defences in London. Some of them are now well over 150 years old, deteriorating with age and through increased use through climate change. Some of the defences are part of buildings, others intersect with bridges and wharves, and some are close to or actually part of World Heritage Sites. This photo here is a photo of the defences near Trinity Hospital in Greenwich on the South Bank. And in the top right, you can just see that white tower with the clock face. That's Trinity Hospital there. And this photo, it's regularly used by the EA. You can see multiple lines of defence raising over the decades, up to about 5 levels of raising here. That's been reactive to past flooding rather than kind of strategic looking ahead. It's not been planned. So you've got 1879 Flood Act, you've got another raise later in the 19th century. After the 1928 flooding, you had the 1930 Flood Act, which then raised even further. And then the top concrete section, those were the interim defences constructed in the 1970s during the construction of the Thames Barrier, post-1953 flooding. And it would be a significant challenge to raise the defences any further, particularly somewhere like this, if they need to be fully rebuilt, given the age, and without affecting heritage, buildings that might form part of the defence, any amenity spaces, and also quite crucially, kind of views of the river. So onto the Thames Barrier. So the decision to build a barrier was based on a report by Sir Herman Bondi in the 1960s, who reported that a major surge tide in London would be a disaster of the singular and immense kind. It would be a knockout blow to the nerve centre of the country. Many designs were submitted. There's a couple of examples here. That top photo, kind of big drop-down gates or guillotine gates. The bottom one, again, similar, lots of gates, but there with locks for boats. Ultimately, Charlton or Woolwich Reach was chosen because it's straight, it's quite deep, but it's not over wide. And that kind of straight reach is important for navigation, so boats can straighten up around a bend and safely pass through. And and construction of the barrier as we know it began in the 1970s, led by the Greater London Council, as it then was. So main objective of the Thames Barrier is to prevent tidal flooding in London. It has multiple power sources, the gates operate independently, it needs to have total reliability when it's and operate when it's needed. We work closely with the Port of London Authority on navigation, and we think the annual closure limit is about 50 to minimise the impact on navigation and ensure we've got sufficient time to maintain the barrier. There's a couple of slides here from when the barrier was being constructed. The top one, that's one of the piers that sits in the river. You can see the concrete shape of it there starting to take shape. And the bottom photo, that is now actually in the bed of the river. You can see there's the access or service tunnel that runs right underneath the Thames from one side to the other, so you can actually access the piers. And this semicircular shape here, that's where the gates actually sit in the riverbed in the open position. So there's the Thames Barrier. I'm sure you probably all know what it looks like. That was completed in 1982. It was first operated in 1983 and officially opened by Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II in 1984. It cost £461 million in 1982, and that's about 1.5 billion in today's money. And about £100 million or £300 million in today's money was used on those interim defences, that kind of extra concrete section on top of the defences through London while the barrier was being constructed. It's one of the largest movable flood barriers in the world. The upstream walls and embankments are lower to allow greater use and enjoyment of the river while keeping the day-to-day tides within that river channel. And then the Thames Barrier itself is closed when surge conditions threaten to overtop those defences in central London. And the next slide is a fairly basic video of actually how the barrier works. And hopefully this sound works now. Please shout if it doesn't.
The Thames Barrier is the main defence against flooding for London and is sited across a 520-metre section of the River Thames. The Thames Barrier has two types of gates. Falling radial gates. These gates sit above the river, making these sections non-navigable. Rising sector gates. These gates rest on the river bed, which allows river traffic to pass through the barrier. In the open position, the gate lies flat with the river bed. This allows the tide to ebb and flow naturally and river traffic to pass through the gates. Hydraulic cylinders are used to rotate the gates into position. Individual gates can be closed in 10 minutes, but the whole barrier closure takes 1.5 hours. The closure usually takes place soon after low tide. When fully raised, the barrier creates a solid steel wall, preventing water flowing upstream towards the capital. The four main gates span 61 metres and weigh over 3,300 tonnes each. Each gate is 20 metres high and can hold back loads of up to 9,000 tonnes. The underspill position assists the opening process, as a controlled amount of water is passed under the gate and up the Thames. The Thames Barrier can only be reopened once the water level upstream of the barrier matches the level downstream. The maintenance position allows the barrier engineers to service the gates and keep them in working order. The falling radial gates are sited towards the banks of the river. These gates are held in position above the river, are non-navigable and are drawn when required. The protective walls downriver have been raised to provide the same standard of protection as the Thames Barrier.
Right. So the tidal defence network is more than just the Thames Barrier and a few walls, though. So there are in total 9 major barriers. So the Thames Barrier and 8 other major barriers, one of which is below in that photo. That's Dartford Creek Barrier. More than 300 kilometres or 200 miles of walls and embankments. Over 400 other active assets or active defences like floodgates and outfalls, and they all work together to protect the Thames estuary. These defences are vital for allowing us to get on with our day-to-day lives in London and the estuary. While the major barriers and embankments in Kent and Essex keep out the biggest storm surges, the river walls in London contain the daily high tides. The system works as one. Without the barriers, we would be at risk from major storms, and without the walls, we would need a permanent barrage across the mouth of the estuary, and London would lose its daily ebb and flow of the tide and the vital biodiversity and habitats that brings. Just a quick look at some of the outer estuary defences and the sheer scale of some of them. This is the lobster smacking on Canby Island in Essex. Over 50 people died on Canby Island in 1953. Most of it is at sea level. And over the years, so looking back at 1902, this sketch here, a very kind of low, rudimentary raised embankment here. And then today, a huge earth embankment with a 1.5 to 2 metre high concrete wall on the top to the height of the roof of that particular building there. So really, really substantial defences in the outer estuary. And this is what's protected by the network of defences throughout the estuary. The Thames Barrier, shown in yellow there, and the other defences has protected us from flooding 221 times since it was completed in 1982. On average, it closes about 5 times a year, protecting over £400 billion worth of residential property and over 1.5 million people. Many businesses, some of the country's most valuable assets, critical infrastructure, transport networks, as well as internationally protected habitats, valuable heritage and cultural assets. Millions more people who work in London or the estuary or who visit could be impacted if flooding caused closure of major transport hubs or hospitals and schools. Businesses could suffer from lost time and customers, and the region's reputation as a major business and tourist hub could be at risk. And all of these risks are disproportionately felt by low-income households, elderly people, minority groups, and vulnerable health groups as well. And the poorest communities are more likely to live in areas at risk of flooding and less likely to have insurance. And now the challenge we're facing. At the top right, local temperatures in the UK are increasing, as well as around the world. Winters are getting wetter. On the left, sea level rise is accelerating. Observed water levels in London and the estuary are increasing, roughly in line with recent climate projections. So what does it mean for the estuary? We're planning for up to 1.15 metres of sea level rise by 2100. And alongside rising sea levels, we're also seeing more frequent storm events, testing those defences more than ever. And on top of that, the defence system is actually getting quite old. You can see here these defences. This is or was Duke Shaw Wharf in Limehouse. We had to we had to undertake emergency works here back in 2017, I think, because that defence was at imminent risk of failure and could have led to the collapse of the buildings behind. So what's the plan? So the Thames Estuary 2100 plan was first published in 2012 and had a full update in May 2023. It's the first adaptive flood risk strategy developed in England, and it uses a flexible approach for adapting to an uncertain and changing situation like climate change. We monitor key indicators like sea level rise, like new climate change science, and the adaptive nature of the plan allows us to respond or take a different course or change some deadlines, depending on changes in the estuary and changes in the climate. The plan maps out a series of flood defence options and decision points that, if delivered successfully, can continue to protect people, property, and the environment of the estuary. However, and this is quite key, the Environment Agency is only responsible for maintaining 12% of the flood defences in the estuary. So it's vital that we work together with landowners and other organisations who are responsible for the remaining 88%. And a bit of a plan here on a page. It's quite a lot of information here, but I'll try and condense it down. The review that we completed in 2023 confirmed we're on the right path still, but we need to really start planning for the future. The top blue arrow here, we need to continue maintaining, refurbishing and replacing what we've already got. We also need to start raising defences. It's going to be quite challenging, as I've alluded to before. Downstream of the barrier, this orange diamond here, we need to raise defences downstream of the barrier by 2040, and upstream of the barrier, including through central London, by 2050, and that's by up to 0.5 metre. Some of the defences are already at the right height, but others aren't. And this will reduce our reliance on the Thames barrier. It will keep the number of closures at a manageable level and prolong its lifespan to 2070. By 2040, we've got a really key decision point as well, and we need to decide what that end of the century option is going to be. So it's in place for 2070 by the time the existing Thames barrier is at the end of its life. We know that it will take several decades to fund, legislate for, design and construct and test such a major piece of infrastructure. So it's ready for 2070. So that key decision point is 2040. And as it notes there, at the moment, the options are a replacement Thames barrier in a similar position, a new barrier at Longreach or Gravesend Reach, they're further downstream, and I've got a map on the next slide. Potentially a series of large flood storage areas in the outer estuary to store water during times of kind of high surge or very high water levels, or potentially a new barrier with locks that might be closed more often and therefore need locks for ships to navigate through. A lot of different factors will contribute to the final choice and that decision, and it's likely to be a decision for the government at the time, so a kind of cross-government decision by 2040. Just a quick map of where those kind of future end of the century options might be. Woolwich Reach or Charlton, which is where the existing barrier is, Longreach, just upstream of the M25 crossing of the River Thames, and then Gravesend Reach further out into the estuary. And those are the three possible locations that have been identified, mainly through navigation modelling, because large ships need time and space to be able to straighten up after coming through a bend in order to navigate safely through a barrier. The blue locations are possible areas for very large flood storage, and all of those options will be tested over the next 10 to 15 years to see which is the most appropriate. And now kind of changing tack just to some wider messages about flood risk and what you can do to prepare for flooding. We have a page on gov.uk where you can check your long-term flood risk. You can put in your postcode and check if you're at risk of river or tidal, surface water, and also the impacts of climate change on those risk sources. If you're at river or tidal flood risk or groundwater risk in some areas, you can sign up to receive our flood warning service. That's all free, and you can receive alerts by text, phone, or email. If you're at surface water risk, we recommend you sign up for the Met Office weather warnings, as it's not currently possible to give flood warnings at a property level for these short, sharp downpours that cause surface water flooding. We have guidance for preparing a flood plan, whether that's a personal one at a community level or for a business. And if you own property or land next to a river, you may be a riparian owner of the river and the defences. And more information on that is on gov.uk. And then final slide is just some links around information and preparing for flooding. So that's the end of my presentation. So thank you very much for listening.
Pete, that was really interesting. We have we got a few questions, and the first one is directed at you. I know you might have briefly mentioned it, but how often are the Thames barrier gates closed? And is it mostly for emergencies, or is it more of an everyday occurrence?
I think I mentioned it's been closed 221 times, so on average 5 times a year. There are kind of clusters of closures depending, when there's particular spells of bad weather. The full closures are just for emergency use, so that's that kind of 221 times. But we do partial test closures every month just to make sure things are in working order. And we also do a yearly full test closure of all of the barriers and gates, I think every September during kind of high spring tides.
Are there any other significant flood barriers around the world that are similar to the Thames flood barrier?
There are quite a few dotted around the world. I'm by no means an expert on those. There are several large movable flood barriers in the Netherlands. There are some in the US. I think there is one proposed in Venice. But yeah, there are various barriers dotted around the world. And there is a group called iStorm that the EA is part of, with other similar organisations to the EA with similar responsibilities that do meet to share expertise, to share knowledge, just so we can help each other improve.
We've had a few more questions come through. So if the barrier is closed, what is the risk of a major storm producing enough water to threaten fluvial flooding, so overtopping the barrier?
To overtop the barrier. Every defence or barrier in theory could be overtopped, but it's the Thames barrier and the defences downstream. It's a world-class standard of protection. It's well over 1 in 1,000 year or 0.1% chance in any year. So it's kind of world-leading protection.
And how does the Environment Agency work with insurance companies when you propose future plans? And do you know how the future upgrades will be paid for?
In terms of insurance companies, all of our data, all of our flood mapping, all of our risk data is provided externally. That's free to access for the insurance companies. They often have their own data sources as well. So we don't necessarily work directly with them, but all of our information is out there and they use that data to set their insurance premiums. In terms of who pays for infrastructure, currently the government has a partnership funding policy for investment in flood defences. Depending on the benefits of a particular scheme versus the costs, the government will pay for a certain amount. That could be anything up to 100%. If you're below that 100% mark, you then have to find, or we as the EA have to find funding from third parties.
Thanks, Pete. Tom, we've had a question come in through for you. What is the most surprising archival piece you've discovered when you were looking through all the flooding images and archive collection?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. Surprising. Uh, I can't think. So I don't think I was sort of overly surprised by anything, but I did. One thing that struck me during sadly it's probably the opposite of a surprise, but struck me during your presentation, Pete, as well, is actually how many of the same issues are coming around again that we from the historical situation. We talk about those with less money and resources being on the most at risk from the flooding, and then that being the same thing going on. So maybe that's the opposite of surprise, but that's probably one of the big takeaways from the presentation, if that sort of answers the question.
Someone also asks, are you still collecting pieces for current day flooding so that they will be archival in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a very active collecting policy at the London Archives, which covers different aspects of our business. So in broad terms, there are various statutory collecting that we do. As we are, I should have said, maybe we're funded by the City of London Corporation, and we are the record office for the City of London Corporation. So the work that the city does in terms of these things, both within the city and its sort of broader suite of responsibilities across London, would come to us as a matter of course, but we also do various collecting based on the needs of sort of telling a story of Londoners and kind of all its variety as well. So yes, active in both regards.
That's good news. Pete, we had a great question about sediment control at the barrier. Do you have to have a strong cleaning process? Does it clean itself normally through the tidal waves? How does that happen?
That's a very good question. Personally, I don't know for certain, but I expect it's mainly kind of self-cleaning as the water moves up and downstream, and particularly I don't know if you remember the schematic video. So when the barrier's been closed, in order to open it, we have to wait for water levels to equalize, and we do that through the kind of undershot position. So water then flushes underneath the gates, flushes out the sills where the gates would normally sit to enable them to drop back into place. So I think it's probably self-cleaning.
Sorry, just reading some of the other questions. Is there possibilities for producing electricity from the tidal waves? And has this been explored for future designs of any flood barriers?
Very good question. I'd like to hope so. It probably wasn't a consideration back in the 60s and 70s when the current barrier was being built and designed. I'd like to think it would be part of the mix in any future barrier designs or replacements. I guess it's balancing the need for flood defence, for maintenance, for navigation, and certainly now and in the future for ecology, environmental considerations, and hydropower for generating electricity. So there's lots more things that would need to be considered in any future barrier, but hopefully hydropower could be one.
And you were mentioning that 2040 is the big year that you have to make all your decisions. Are there any little steps that you'll be taking in the lead up to that to improve the flood defences?
Yeah, so there's work that needs to be done to maintain and improve what we've got all the way to 2040. So we've just finished one major programme of defence maintenance, and another one will be starting very soon. So we're continuing to invest money in the defences, taking action where we need to, and continuing to maintain the Thames Barrier.
We have a final question for you both. Pete, if there has been any historical pieces that have stuck out to you as a modern day flood professional, and Tom, as a historian, how could our current day flood and climate situation be looked at from a future archival perspective?
Historical. It's probably 1953, I think, because that was just such a huge flood event. The impacts were felt in our country and surrounding countries around the North Sea, particularly in the Netherlands. It led to a huge step change in how they approach flood risk management and how we approach flood risk management in our country. It led to the construction of the Thames Barrier. It led to defences being raised again. So yeah, I'd probably say 53.
So one thing I think is really important in terms of contemporary archive collecting is making sure we get sort of different sort of perspectives and voices in it. So somewhere like the London Archives is traditionally very strong on sort of institutional voices, things like the Great London Council, their various predecessors. Those things quite naturally come into the world of archives, which means we have very good records on decision making, infrastructure, technical specifications. But actually that human side of thing comes into an archive a bit less naturally. There needs to be more effort in that. So I think it's the work that we do, that people who are just coming to us as people to know that their histories are important, and that human side of things is captured as well. And then the challenge for the future, and that is obviously as things move towards, or have moved into the digital, it's how we adapt our digital preservation, which is a very flourishing field of archives. I should reassure you in that regard. It's how we kind of keep that digital preservation so it can sit alongside the records we already have.
All really good points, and thank you for those answers. That's the end of the Q&A and the presentation today. Thank you for all your wonderful questions. If anything does come to mind after the session, please do feel free to reach out to us. Our contact details will be shared after the webinar. Before we finish, I just want to briefly summarise this week's Flood Resilience Toolkit takeaway. These are the actions that you can take following today's sessions to help you improve your flood resilience. And these were sent in the chat, and you can sign up to the Met Office weather warnings, register for the Environment Agency flood warnings, and make sure to check your local flood risk. They're very simple steps, but they can provide vital early information and help you make informed decisions during severe weather. All links are in the chat, and we'll be sending out the slides as well as the webinar recording. So looking ahead, our next session is on the 28th of January, where we'll be focusing on water underground, exploring London's hidden river system and vulnerabilities of underground infrastructure. We'll be joined by David Harding from Thames Water and Nicholas Grusel from Transport for London, who will share their perspectives on how flooding affects systems beneath the city. Thanks again for joining us and taking the time to be part of the Flood Resilience webinar series. We hope you've all enjoyed the session, and we hope you can join us for the next one. Thanks all.